He's also on Westwood One. He's got a podcast on the Believe Podcast Network with his daughter, Lee. Mike Mayock here on the Rich Eisen Show. Good to see you, Mike. How are you, sir?
Rich, I'm doing great, and I'm kind of fired up because I get to watch my nephew in the March Madness tournament this week, so it's kind of cool.
All right. Follow-up question for those who may not know. What do you mean, Mike?
My brother Mark, who followed me to Boston College, has a son that's 6'7", and Mark's wife was a college basketball player, 6 foot forward at St. Joe. Mark was a 6'4".
Yeah.
So Matt Mayock is playing at American University, and they won the Patriot League last week. And
Okay.
they actually have a play-in game tomorrow
Tomorrow
in
night,
that
yes.
the first four.
Yeah.
And the prize for winning that is you go to play number one Duke.
Yes.
So let's just say this happens, Mike. Would your nephew be the one that would have to mark like on a man-to-man Cooper flag? Could we see Mayock on Cooper flag? Is that possible? Is that
The
possible?
cool thing about Matt is he's 6'7",
Yeah.
and he's so skinny that if he turns sideways, you can't even see him. But he's like, here's my evaluator hat. You always kill me about being an evaluator.
Yeah, there it is. Yeah.
Like he's long, he's athletic, he can cover better than people would think because, you think of a 6'7" guy not having quick feet. Well, he's so long and athletic, he's got an ability to cover a long range and a big radius. So sometimes I see him on a point guard, and I'm like, what are you doing putting him on a point guard? Other times he ends up on a center. So you never know whether or not he'll be on Cooper flag or not because he covers everybody. He's a sophomore. He plays about 25, 30 minutes a game. He was on the All-Patriot League freshman team a year ago, and it's kind of cool for the Mayock family.
Well, it might be that famed Mayock ankle flexion, Mike. It could be that, You know what I mean? There's no heavy-legged Mayocks, so there you go.
Yeah, there are a few of us.
Okay.
There are a few of us.
I love it. So keep an eye on that on Wednesday night when American takes on Mount St. Mary's for the right to take on Duke. By the way, in Raleigh, there aren't anybody who's a Duke fan in Raleigh, North Carolina. Anyway, don't worry about it.
None whatsoever.
So, Mike, we had Tyler Shuck on last hour. Loved talking to him, man. Loved it. I mean, he told his whole story and the injury history. And I mentioned him. I'm like, you're 25. You got the injury history. What do you say to people? And his response was like, it makes me better. Makes me better. He goes, I've been benched. I've won. I've been carted off. I've come back. I've been with 5 offensive coordinators. He goes, that sounds like basically, I'm paraphrasing, a lot of quarterbacks in the NFL have dealt like this. So he called himself the most NFL ready quarterback of the entire class. Mike.
Yeah, and I love the way his postseason has gone. I love what you just said. Because if I was that kid, I'd be saying the exact same thing to anybody that asked me, especially NFL teams. And I was down at the Senior Bowl and knew very little about him other than his background. I hadn't done any tape. I'm like, who's this kid from Louisville slinging it around, very energetic, very confident. The combine, we talked about how energetic he was, outgoing. It forced me to go watch some more tape of him. I watched Notre Dame. I watched Boston College. At this point, Rich, I kind of agree with everything he told you. He's already been through the mill. He's had all the injuries. He's had to deal with all the different offenses, all the different coordinators. It does sound like a young quarterback in the NFL. So, Rich, I would tell you right now on my quarterback list, he's number 4. And he wasn't there a couple of months ago. And he's an impressive young man and a really good football player.
He's sitting there in the last third of the first round, Mike. What do you think? Steelers sitting there at 21, even if they do get Rodgers, who we'll talk about with you in a sec. I mean, a team trading up, maybe having the temerity to dare reach out to Howie Roseman and say, let's make a deal. What do you think with Shuck?
Here's what I think about Shuck, Jackson Dart, any quarterback in any year that a team is looking at potentially as a first-round pick. What I would tell you, Phil, it's funny. Brian Billick and I had this conversation at his dinner table about 15 years ago when we both worked at NFL Network. And we got together just to talk draft, just the two of us. It went on for hours. And we had a big conversation about this point. Philosophically, if you believe a quarterback is your guy. Whether the rest of the world thinks he's a third-round pick or whether he's whether or not there's a perception that he can play at that level, if your people in your building go, that's our guy, then why does it matter where you take him? And Brian and I went round and round on it. And here's what I would say about both Ward and Shuck. Not Ward, excuse me, Jackson Dart and Shuck, is the Giants at 3. You got to be in the quarterback business. Las Vegas at 6. I mean, Mel Kiper had Jackson Dart going number 9 in his most recent mock draft to New Orleans. And I find that intriguing and good for Mel, because this is my point. If organizationally you feel like that's your guy, go get him. Don't wait and hope you get him in the second round. And same thing for Pittsburgh at 21. If you want to get Tyler Shough in the second round, don't sit there and wait for him. Go get him. So bottom line is there's 32 starting quarterback positions and not enough starting quarterbacks. And that's why I give Denver so much credit last year with Bo Nix. They didn't care about the noise. They didn't care. They didn't have a great combine performance. They figured out by the end of the process that was their guy, and they took him. And look what happened.
So, Mike Mayock here on the Rich Eisen Show. If you're the Giants waiting on Rodgers and, you're the Steelers waiting on Rodgers, do you give him a ticking clock? Do you put an expiration date on your interest, Mike?
I feel a little bit like Cam Hayward right now.
Hey, you saw that, right? Okay.
Yeah. I found that Cam's comment was basically, he was asked if he was going to recruit Rodgers to Pittsburgh. And he's like, hey, you either want to be a Steeler or you don't. I'm not going in any dark rooms and trying to recruit him. You got to make a decision, pal. Let's go one way or the other. And in today's world of NFL detente, where we pray together after every game and we exchange jerseys and we hug and we kiss, I kind of like an old school guy going, you know what? Just stop with your BS and you're either in or you're not. Let's go. I feel the same way. However, Rich, the nuance is kind of, you really want this guy because you think he can help you win football games, bottom line.
Correct.
However, only one of the 3 teams is going to get him. And if you look at the 3 teams, Rich, I didn't think Minnesota was interested a couple of weeks ago. And it tells me that they're not 100% convinced that J.J. McCarthy is either ready physically, coming off the injury, or they're nervous about his level of play. But if they're trying to sign Aaron Rodgers, and they're going to have to pay Aaron Rodgers starter money, because Aaron's a smart guy. He's not going to say, hey, I'll come in there and just pay me a few million. He's going to demand starter money so he gets starter reps in training camp. He's going to want to look in their eye and say, I'm your starter. If I'm Aaron Rodgers and I look at Pittsburgh, I go, okay, that's second best. I'd much rather be in Minnesota where they just won 14 games and they got all kinds of offensive firepower. Pittsburgh is second best, but not really sexy to me. And the Giants, no way in hell. You've just been through what you've been through with the Jets. Why would you go there on a hope and a prayer? So, from Aaron's perspective, I think he's holding everybody up right now. And the other teams feel like they don't have a good second choice, so they're allowing him to do it.
That's it. That's why you wouldn't put an expiration date on your interest to him, or, I guess the draft would be that expiration date now, if you're willing to wait it out for how long. I guess Rodgers is waiting to hear if the Vikings are going to tell him no. Is that this, you would say?
I think something has to break in the next few days. I think he's got to have to make a decision. Teams can't wait indefinitely. And somebody's going to be left holding the bag, and it kind of brings in the conversation we had last week, which I'm happy we had, about the whole Kirk Cousins, Derek Carr situations.
Mm-hmm.
Because, if you're the Giants, you're the Steelers, you're Minnesota, you get shut out on this guy. Do you want to go Joe Flacco? Do you want to go Jameis Winston? Or maybe, what's it going to take to get a Kirk Cousins, who's a significant upgrade from that group, or a Derek Carr? And I thought Atlanta did a really smart thing by absorbing the $10 million roster bonus for next year because they've controlled value, and I think he's going to be in play. So, I mean, all three teams have already showed you, Rich, what they think about Russell Wilson, Joe Flacco, and all the rest of them. Love to have Joe in the building, but not as a 17-game starter.
So let's say the Giants don't get Rodgers because, as you just mentioned, walking through it, you think Rodgers' thought process might be is no way, the Giants are too far from it. I just did that with the Jets and so on and so forth. What do you think about Tennessee's willingness to move out? Or do you think Cam Ward is so good, he's definitely better than Will Levis, and they're just going to end up sticking and picking, and it's the quarterback, not Abdul Carter or Travis Hunter, a month away from the draft?
I think, in my mind, it's probably 75-25 stick and pick, and that would be Cam Ward. I think an intriguing position for them would be moving to 3 per year. And I think, I hate to put it this way, but, I mean, Joe Shane and Brian Daboll right now are under a lot of pressure, both to get a quarterback and to win football games. And I think because of that, regardless of the Rodgers situation, they've got to be in the quarterback game, and they got to be looking at 1 or 2. And if I'm Tennessee, I'm going, okay, if I want to move down, 3 is the perfect place. Worst case scenario, I'm either getting a quarterback or I'm getting the first or second best position player, plus probably a first-round pick next year when there are an awful lot more quarterbacks available. So those, I think, are the 2 logical plays for Tennessee, and I think the Giants figure into it very heavily.
So I was going to ask you, what do you think the freight would be for the Giants to move up or Cleveland to move up? 1 spot, 2 spots. What do you think the cost would be, Mike?
Well, I mean, if you can look at the trade chart all you want, which I did this morning, it would be a next year. If I'm looking at it as with the GM hat on,
yes, sir.
With Tennessee, I want a first-round pick next year, plus probably 2 more picks this year. And I'm not, probably a second round or a third round, a second day pick. Let me call it that. And maybe you get another existing player or later pick. But it certainly, I think you want to focus on the fact that you want the one next year because you haven't solved your quarterback problem. And the Giants probably aren't going to be very good, and they're going to be picking high. So you want their pick in the first round next year, along with your own first round pick to give you leverage. You're going to be in a much better quarterback draft class on paper right now. So for Tennessee, I think it makes a ton of sense.
What about Cleveland? Would you counsel they do that? Up 2-1? What do you think?
From 2-1?
Yes, sir. For a quarterback. What do you think?
If they only love 1, for sure. I remember talking to Howie years ago when it was right around this time, Howie Roseman, and he and I were sitting in his office. I was working for the NFL Network. Mm-hmm. Door closed, and we had a very private conversation about Carson Wentz versus Jared Goff and how he knew he had to move up. I forget where he was, like 12 or 14. He knew he had to move up twice.
Yeah, he had hopscotch. He hopscotched, didn't he, Mike?
Correct.
Yeah.
And he knew he had to move twice to get to 1 or 2.
Right.
But his point was, I love both those kids. Like, I'd be good either way. And that's what ended up happening. They got Carson Wentz at 2. So, if you're talking about Cleveland moving from 2-1, that's expensive and difficult and all those other things because obviously you don't want to give up the draft capital. But if you're worried about if there's only 1 quarterback in this class and that's your guy, mm-hmm. you got to go get him.
Mike Mayock here on the Rich Eisen Show. Now that we're closing in on a week of the new league year starting, what's your impression? Who do you think did well? Who do you want to hand out the Mike Mayock flowers to, if any?
I think the team that I think did what they needed to do the most was Chicago, because Caleb Williams is a big-time talent. I had the same grade on him as I did Jaden Daniels.
Really?
And there's a lot of skill position talent on that roster, but the offensive line wasn't very good. Brian Poles is a former offensive lineman. Ben Johnson's coming from a place where they prioritized offensive line. So they went out and got 3 offensive linemen. They traded. And what I love is they got Drew Dahlman as a 26-year-old center. They got Jonah Jackson, a 28-year-old guard who I loved coming out of college, and Joe Tooney, who might be 32, but Joe Tooney can still flat out play, and his veteran ability and leadership will really help Caleb Williams. And Rich, what I love most about it, of course, the talent infusion is critical, but he's going to have three interior offensive linemen setting the edge right in front of him. And even better than that, the communication amongst those three guys that will then leak back to the quarterback, it's going to be unbelievable. And they're not going to have any free runners running up the middle and X stunts from linebackers. And they're not going to have free run because they're all going to be on the same page. And they're going to take a huge weight off that quarterback. And by the way, it also makes their tackles better because they can play from inside out and push everybody up the field. So those three moves I thought were critical and make Chicago an instant contender in that division.
What about a team that went shopping in free agency as opposed to just moving around players?
Well, I thought New England was interesting because I know Vrabel a little bit, what kind of guy he is.
Mm-hmm.
They had an awful lot of money to spend, and it's one thing to have the money. The other thing is how you spend it. So I thought they had two buckets. It was really interesting. Bucket number one is plug them in. They can play day one and make your football team better. And that's Milt Williams. It's Carlton Davis, the corner. Harold Landry was an edge guy with Vrabel in Tennessee.
Mm-hmm.
And Morgan Moses, the tackle, even though he's 34, is a needed upgrade on their O-line. So they paid some money for those guys. And then, in true Mike Vrabel fashion, they got the glue guys, the grinders, the ballers. Mac Hollins, I don't really care what he wears on game day on his feet. Mac Collins is a baller. Special teams, wide out, whatever. He's a grinder. Robert Spillane, two-down linebacker, sets a tone. Not great in man coverage, don't care. Sets a tone. Marcus Epps, free safety, started a bunch of games, shows up every week, along with Kairos Tonga, a defensive tackle, again, who big guy, run game, kind of a grinder. So I love the fact that there's two different buckets. They spent a good amount of money. They got kind of really good football players in one bucket that make you better day one. And then they get those culture guys in the second bucket. Really thought they did a nice job.
I like what Washington did too, Mike. You know what I mean? Like, you got the cap space and you look around some other teams with some terrific players that are pricey that you could pluck for the right draft capital deal, and Deebo Samuel and Laramie Tunsil, while your quarterback, your unicorn, is making what he's making in year two of his rookie deal. I thought it was really smart. I know they gave up 5 draft choices. They got one back with Tunsil, but that's you're getting some top-notch Pro Bowl caliber players. You can pay them. You got the space for it. You got your OC still there because he didn't get a gig somewhere else. You got year 2 for your guy. I really liked it a lot, Mike.
Rich, I think you're right on target. And it starts at the top. I think the GM and the head coach are tied at the hip philosophically, and everything they do is in lockstep. And it was interesting because last year they did a bunch of one-year deals with veterans, which they've done again this year, which I think is a smart strategy. But to your point, they get Deebo, and I think Deebo is going to be pissed off and in shape and ready to go this year.
Yes.
Okay. I thought the Laramie Tunsil thing, even though Tunsil, I thought, had a down year last year a little bit, a lot of penalties, didn't play quite as well. He's only going to be 31 this summer. I mean, he's still a gifted top 5 offensive tackle when he plays well. Those two moves, Rich, back up what you're talking about with that quarterback who is generational, my opinion. And the 2 tight ends, Zach Ertz was like his security blanket. They re-signed 2 tight ends. So from my perspective, when you take care of the guys on offense that support the quarterback, that's one thing. But Dan Quinn also said, hey, Bobby Wagner, you're coming back. I thought they made all the right moves, both from a trade perspective, a re-signing of their own people perspective, and then some key free agency moves.
Well, Mike, thanks for the time. Always love chatting with you. Good luck to the American Eagles in the, by the way, so you're aware, because I know you like being accurate, it's a first 4 game. They don't like calling it the play-in, the same way the NFL says it's not the tampering window. You know what I mean? So good luck to the American Eagles against Mount St. Mary's, and then after that, Duke.
Rich, I appreciate it, man. As always, I love talking ball with you.
Well, right back at you. Same thing. Mike Mayock right here on The Rich Eisen Show. Great stuff, as always. Catch The Rich Eisen Show live weekdays from 12 to 3 p.m. Eastern on Roku Sports Channel in the U.S.